Honduras was already occupied by many indigenous peoples when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century. The western central part of Honduras was inhabited by the Lencas, the central north coast by the Tol, the area east and west of Trujillo by the Pech and the Mayans and Sumo. These autonomous groups maintained commercial relationships with each other and with other populations as distant as Panama and Mexico. Pre-Columbian era. Archaeologists have demonstrated that Honduras has a multi-ethnic prehistory. An important part of that prehistory was the Mayan presence around the city of Copan in western Honduras, which is near the Guatemalan border. Copan was a major Maya city that began flourishing around 150 AD but reached its height in the late Classic. It has many carved inscriptions and stelae. The ancient kingdom, named Xuqpi, existed from the 5th century to the early 9th century, with antecedents going back to at least the 2nd century. The Mayan civilization began a marked decline in the population during the 9th century, but there is evidence of people still living in and around the city until at least 1200. By the time the Spanish came to Honduras, the once great city-state of Copan was overrun by the jungle, and the surviving Chorti were isolated from their Chashan linguistic peers to the west. The non-Maya Lencas were then dominant in western Honduras. Conquest period. Honduras was first sighted by Europeans when Christopher Columbus arrived at the Bay Islands on the 30th of July 1502 on his fourth voyage. On the 14th of August 1502 Columbus landed on the mainland near modern Trujillo. Columbus named the country Honduras for the deep waters off its coast. In January 1524, Hernán Cortés directed Captain Cristobal de Olid to establish a colony for him in Honduras. Olid sailed with a force of several ships and over 400 soldiers and colonists. He sailed first to Cuba to pick up supplies Cortés had arranged for him, where Governor Velázquez convinced him to go and claim the colony he was to found as his own. Olid sailed from Cuba to the coast of Honduras, coming ashore east of Puerto Cabellos at Triunfo de la Cruz, where he initially settled and declared himself governor. Hernán Cortés, however, in 1524, got word of Olid's insurrection and sent his cousin, Francisco de las Casas, along with several ships to Honduras to remove Olid and claim the area for Cortés. Las Casas, however, lost most of his fleet in a series of storms along the coast of Belize and Honduras. His ships limped into the bay at Triunfo, where Olid had established his headquarters. When Las Casas arrived at Olid's headquarters, a large part of Olid's army was inland, dealing with another threat from a party of Spaniards under Gil González de Villa. Nevertheless, Olid decided to launch an attack with two caravels. Las Casas returned fire and sent boarding parties which captured Olid's ships. Under the circumstances, Olid proposed a truce to which Las Casas agreed, and he did not land his forces. During the night, a fierce storm destroyed his fleet and about a third of his men were lost. The remainder were taken prisoner after 2 days of exposure and without food. After being forced to swear loyalty to Olid, they were released. However, Las Casas was kept a prisoner, soon to be joined by González, who had been captured by Olid's inland force. The Spanish record two different stories about what happened next. Antonio de Herrera y Tordesillas, writing in the 17th century, records that Olid's soldiers rose up and murdered him. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, in his verdadera Historia de la Conquista de Nueva España, recalls that Las Casas captured Olid and beheaded him at Naco. In the meantime, Cortés had marched overland from Mexico to Honduras, arriving in 1525. Corte ordered the founding of two cities, Nuestra Señora de la Navidad, near modern Puerto Corte, and Trujillo, and named Francisco de las Casas governor. However, both Las Casas and Corte sailed back to Mexico before the end of 1525, where Francisco was arrested and sent back to Spain as a prisoner by Estrada and Albornoz. Francisco returned to Mexico in 1527, and returned again to Spain with Corte in 1528. On the 25th of April 1526, before returning to Mexico, Cortés appointed Hernando de Saavedra as governor of Honduras and left instructions to treat the indigenous people well. On the 26th of October 1526, Diego López de Salcedo was appointed by the emperor as governor of Honduras, replacing Saavedra. The next decade was marked by clashes between the personal ambitions of the rulers and conquerors, which hindered the installation of good government. The Spanish colonists rebelled against the leaders, and the indigenous people rebelled against the masters, and against the abuses the new masters imposed on them. Salcedo, seeking to enrich himself, had serious clashes with Pedrarias, the governor of Castilla del Oro, who for his part, wanted to have Honduras as part of his domains. In 1528, Salcedo arrested Pedrarias and forced him to cede part of his Honduran domain, but Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, rejected the agreement. After the death of Salcedo in 1530, the settlers became arbiters of power. Governors hung and removed. In this situation, the settlers asked Pedro de Alvarado to end the anarchy. With the arrival of Alvarado in 1536, chaos decreased, and the region was under authority. In 1537, Francisco de Montejo was appointed governor. He set aside the division of territory made by Alvarado upon arrival in Honduras. One of his principal captains, Alonso de Caceres, was responsible for quelling the indigenous revolt, led by the cacique Lempira in 1537 and 1538. In 1539, Alvarado and Montejo had serious disagreements over who was governor, which caught the attention of the Council of India. Montejo went to Chiapas, and Alvarado became governor of Honduras. During the period leading up to the conquest of Honduras by Pedro de Alvarado, many indigenous people along the north coast of Honduras were captured and taken as slaves to work on Spain's Caribbean plantations. It wasn't until Pedro de Alvarado defeated the indigenous resistance headed by Cacamba near Ticamaya that the Spanish began to conquer the country in 1536. Alvarado divided the native towns and gave their labor to the Spanish conquistadors in repartimiento. Further indigenous uprisings near Gracias a Dios, Comayagua, and Olancho occurred in 1537–38. The uprising near Gracias a Dios was led by Lempira, who is honored today by the name of the Honduran currency, Colonial Honduras. The defeat of Lempira's revolt, and the decline in fighting among rival Spanish factions all contributed to expanded settlement and increased economic activity in Honduras. In late 1540, Honduras looked to be heading towards development and prosperity, thanks to the establishment of Gracias as the regional capital of the Audiencia of Guatemala. However, this decision created resentment in the populated areas of Guatemala and El Salvador. In 1549, the capital was moved to Antigua, Guatemala, and Honduras, and remained a new province within the Captaincy General of Guatemala until 1821. colonial mining operations. The initial mining centers were located near the Guatemalan border, around Gracias. In 1538, these mines produced significant quantities of gold. In the early 1540s, the center for mining shifted eastward to the Rio Guaiape Valley, and silver joined gold as a major product. This change contributed to the rapid decline of Gracias and the rise of Ágora as the center of colonial Honduras. The demand for labor also led to further revolts and accelerated the decimation of the native population. As a result, African slavery was introduced into Honduras, and by 1545 the province may have had as many as 2,000 slaves. Other gold deposits were found near San Pedro Sula and the port of Trujillo. Mining production began to decline in 1560, and thus the importance of Honduras. In early 1569, new silver discoveries briefly revived the economy, which led to the founding of Tegucigalpa, which soon began to rival Ágora as the most important city of the province. The silver boom peaked in 1584, and economic depression returned shortly thereafter. Honduras mining efforts were hampered by lack of capital, labor and the difficult terrain. Mercury, vital for the production of silver, was scarce. Besides the neglect of the officials, the partially conquered northern coast, while the Spanish made significant conquests in the southern half of the area, they had less success in the Caribbean section on the north. They founded a number of towns on the coast, Puerto Cabelos in the east and on the west, and sent minerals and other exports across the country from the Pacific side to be sent to Spain from the Atlantic ports. They founded a number of inland towns on the northwestern side of the province, notably Naco and San Pedro Sula. In the northeast side, the province of Tegucigalpa resisted all attempts to conquer it, physically in the 16th century, and spiritually, by missionaries in the 17th and 18th centuries. Among the groups found along northern coast and in neighboring Nicaragua were the Mosquito, who, although organized in democratic and egalitarian way, had an institution of king, and hence were known as the Mosquito Kingdom. One of the major problems for the Spanish rulers of Honduras was the activity of the British in northern Honduras, a region over which they had only tenuous control. These activities began in the 16th century and continued until the 19th century. In the early years, European pirates frequently attacked the villages on the Honduran Caribbean. The Providence Island Company, which occupied Providence Island not far from the coast, raided it occasionally and probably also had some settlements on the shore, possible around Cape Gracias. Around 1638, the King of the Mosquito visited England and made an alliance with the English crown. In 1643, an English expedition destroyed the city of Trujillo, Honduras's main port. The British and the Mosquito Kingdom. The Spanish sent a fleet from Cartagena which destroyed the English colony at Providence Island in 1641, and for a time the presence of an English base so close to the shore was eliminated. At about the same time, however, a group of slaves revolted and captured a ship on which they were traveling, and ended up wrecking it at Cape Gracias. Managing to get ashore, they were received by the Mosquito, and within a generation had given birth to the Mosquito Zambo, a mixed-race group that by 1715 had become the leaders of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the English captured Jamaica in 1655 and soon were seeking allies on the coast, and hit upon the Mosquito, whose King Jeremy visited Jamaica in 1687. A variety of other Europeans made settlements in the area during this time. An account of 1699 reveals a patchwork of private individuals, large Mosquito family groups, Spanish settlements and pirate hideouts along the coast. Britain declared much of the area a protectorate in 1740, though they exercised little authority as a result of this decision. British colonization was particularly strong in the Bay Islands, and alliances between the British and Mosquito as well as more local supporters made this an area the Spanish could not easily control and a haven for pirates. Bourbon reforms. In the early 18th century, the Bourbon dynasty, linked to the rulers of France, replaced the Habsburgs on the throne of Spain. The new dynasty began a series of reforms throughout the empire, designed to make administration more efficient and profitable, and to facilitate the defense of the colonies. Among these reforms was a reduction in tax on precious metals and the cost of mercury, which was a royal monopoly. In Honduras, these reforms contributed to the resurgence of the mining industry in the 1730s. Under the Bourbons, the Spanish government made several efforts to regain control of the Caribbean coast. In 1752, the Spaniards built the fort of San Fernando de Moa. In 1780, the Spanish returned to Trujillo, who started out as base of operations against British settlements to the east. During the decade of 1780, the Spanish regained control of the Bay Islands and took most of the British and their allies in the Black River area. They were not, however, able to expand the control beyond Puerto Cabelos and Trujillo, thanks to determined Mosquito resistance. The Anglo-Spanish Convention of 1786 issued the final recognition of Spanish sovereignty over the Caribbean coast. Honduras in the 19th century. Independence from Spain. In the early 19th century, Napoleon's occupation of Spain led to the outbreak of revolts all across Spanish America. In New Spain, all of the fighting by those seeking independence was done in the center of that area from 1810 to 1821, what today is central Mexico. Once the viceroy was defeated in the capital city, today Mexico City, in 1821, the news of the independence were sent to all the territories of New Spain, including the intendancies of the former captaincy of Guatemala. Accepting this as a fact, Honduras joined the other Central American intendancies in a joint declaration of independence from Spain. The public proclamation was done through the Act of Independence in 1821. After the Declaration of Independence, it was the intention of the New Spain Parliament to establish a commonwealth whereby the King of Spain, Ferdinand VII, would also be Emperor of New Spain, and in which both countries were to be governed by separate laws and with their own legislative officers. Should the king refuse the position, the law provided for a member of the House of Bourbon to accede to the New Spain throne. Ferdinand VII did not recognize the independence and said that Spain would not allow any other European prince to take the throne of New Spain. By request of Parliament, the president of the Regency, Agustín de Iturbide, was proclaimed Emperor of New Spain, but the Parliament also decided to rename New Spain to Mexico. The Mexican Empire was the official name given to this monarchical regime from 1821 to 1823. The territory of the Mexican Empire included the continental intendancies and provinces of New Spain proper. Federal independence period. In 1823, a revolution in Mexico ousted Emperor Agustín de Iturbide, and a new Mexican Congress voted to allow the Central American intendancies to decide their own fate. That year, the United Provinces of Central America was formed of the 5 Central American intendancies under General Manuel José Arce. The intendancies took the new name of states. Among the most important figures of the federal era include the first democratically elected president in Honduras, Dionisio de Herrera, a lawyer, whose government, begun in 1824, established the first constitution. Gen. Francisco Morazan, federal president 1830–1834 and 1835–1839, whose figure embodies the ideal American Unionist, and José Cecilio del Valle, editor of the Declaration of Independence signed in Guatemala on 15 September 1821, and foreign minister of Mexico in 1823. Soon, social and economic differences between Honduras and its regional neighbors exacerbated harsh partisan strife among Central American leaders, and brought the collapse of the Federation from 1838 to 1839. General Morazan led unsuccessful efforts to maintain the Federation. Restoring Central American unity remained the officially stated chief aim of Honduran foreign policy until after World War I. Honduras broke away from the Central American Federation in October 1838 and became independent and sovereign state. Democratic period between 1838 to 1899. Ágora was the capital of Honduras until 1880, when it was transferred to Tegucigalpa. In the decades of 1840 and 1850, Honduras participated in several failed attempts to restore Central American unity, such as the Confederation of Central America, the Covenant of Guatemala, the Diet of Sonsonate, the Diet of Nacarome, and national representation in Central America. Although Honduras eventually adopted the name Republic of Honduras, the Unionist ideal never wanted, and Honduras was one of the Central American countries that pushed hardest for the policy of regional unity. In 1850, Honduras attempted to build, with foreign assistance, an interoceanic railroad from Trujillo to Tegucigalpa and then on to the Pacific coast. The project stalled due to difficulties in the work, corruption, and other issues, and in 1888, ran out of money when it reached San Pedro Sula, resulting in its growth into the nation's main industrial center and second largest city. Since independence, nearly 300 small internal rebellions and civil wars have occurred in the country, including some changes of government.